The desert wind howled through the canyon passes like a wounded animal, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of another merciless night. The sun, a dying ember on the horizon, painted the jagged rocks in shades of blood and rust. Sarah Mackenzie pressed herself against a boulder, her breath coming in ragged gasps that seemed too loud in the vast silence of the Arizona territory. Her dress, once a modest blue calico that her mother had sewn with such care, now hung in tatters from her shoulders. Dark stains, some mud, some blood, mapped the horror of the past 2 days across the fabric. She couldn't stop her hands from shaking as she peered around the rock face, searching the lengthening shadows for any sign of pursuit. The memories came in fragments, sharp as broken glass. The wagon train had been making good time toward Tucson when they struck. She remembered her father's voice, strong and reassuring just moments before the first gunshot shattered the morning calm. Then chaos, horses screaming, women shrieking, the thunderous cacophony of rifles. Her mother pushing her beneath the wagon, whispering prayers that were cut short by a sound Sarah would never forget. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the images remained. Bodies strewn across the desert floor like discarded dolls. Her younger brother Thomas, only 12, trying to reload father's rifle with trembling fingers before— No, she couldn't think of that. Couldn't think of how she'd survived by playing dead among the corpses of everyone she'd ever loved, lying still as the bandits picked through their belongings like vultures. The attack hadn't been random. These weren't ordinary outlaws or renegades. She'd caught glimpses of their faces, hard men with calculating eyes, too organized, too efficient. They'd been looking for something specific, tearing through the wagons with purpose. When they'd found whatever it was in the Hartley wagon, their leader, a man with a scar bisecting his left cheek, had given the order she'd never unhear. No witnesses. Sarah had waited until nightfall before crawling from beneath her mother's body. The bandits had made camp not far from the massacre site, confident in their work. She'd slipped away like a ghost, barefoot to muffle her steps, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and a horror that threatened to swallow her whole. That had been 2 days ago. 2 days of stumbling through arroyos and over rocky ridges, her feet torn and bleeding, her throat parched beyond endurance. She'd found a small spring yesterday morning, but the water had only reminded her body of its other needs she couldn't fulfill. Her stomach had stopped growling hours ago, resigned to emptiness. Now, as darkness crept across the desert floor like spilled ink, Sarah knew she couldn't go much further. Her legs trembled with each step, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. She'd seen the circling buzzards since noon, patient death watchers waiting for her to stumble and not rise again. A coyote's howl echoed across the canyon, answered by another, then another. The sound raised goose flesh on her arms despite the day's lingering heat. They knew she was weak, alone. Everything in this harsh land could sense vulnerability like blood in the water. Sarah forced herself to move, each step an act of will. She had to find shelter before full dark, somewhere defensible. The rocks ahead formed a natural amphitheater, and she thought she glimpsed the dark mouth of a cave. If she could just reach it— Her foot caught on a hidden stone, and she went down hard, her palms scraping against the gravelly earth. This time, getting up seemed impossible. Her body had simply decided it had endured enough. She lay there, cheek pressed to the still warm ground, and found herself thinking how peaceful it would be to simply close her eyes and let the desert claim her. What was the point of surviving when everyone else was gone? When the only future stretching before her was one of loneliness and nightmares? Her family's dreams of a new life in California had died with them in that blood-soaked draw. She had no money, no supplies, no destination. Even if she somehow reached civilization, what then? A young woman alone in the territories faced limited options, none of them pleasant. The coyotes called again, closer now. Sarah could picture them, lean shadows with yellow eyes, closing in with the patience of creatures who knew death intimately. Perhaps it would be quick. Perhaps it would be a mercy. She dragged herself forward on her elbows, not from hope but from some primitive instinct that refused to surrender. The cave mouth seemed miles away, wavering in her blurred vision like a desert mirage. Her dress caught on a thorny ocotillo, tearing the fabric further, and she left it, too exhausted to care about modesty anymore. That's when she saw it, a thin trickle of water seeping from the rocks near the cave entrance, forming a small pool before disappearing into the thirsty earth. The sight of it awakened a desperate hunger in her cells. She crawled faster, heedless of the sharp stones cutting into her skin. The pool was barely larger than a dinner plate and tasted of minerals and dirt, but to Sarah it was sweeter than honey. She drank in small sips, her stomach cramping in protest, then splashed the precious liquid on her burning face. The cave yawned before her, dark and unknowable, but it promised shelter from the coming night. She managed to drag herself just inside the entrance before her strength finally failed entirely. The stone floor felt cool against her fevered skin, and she curled into herself, making her body as small as possible. Outside, the coyotes had gone silent. Whether they'd lost interest or were simply waiting, she didn't know and no longer cared. Sarah's mind began to drift, sliding between wakefulness and delirium. She saw her mother's face, kind and careworn, reminding her to say her prayers. Her father, teaching Thomas to whittle while she watched, jealous of their easy companionship. The family Bible, now lost forever, where her birth was recorded in her mother's careful script. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the darkness. Sorry for surviving when they hadn't. Sorry for the cowardice that had kept her hidden while her family died. Sorry for wanting, even now, to join them rather than face tomorrow alone. The desert night deepened, bringing with it a cold that seemed to reach into her very bones. Sarah pulled the remnants of her dress tighter, though it offered little protection. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, a lonely sound that echoed her own desolation. She thought about the morning. If morning came for her, the sun would rise as it always did, indifferent to human suffering. The buzzards would return to their patient circling, and she would have to decide whether to keep fighting or to simply let go. The words came unbidden to her lips, a prayer her mother had taught her long ago. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." But she couldn't finish it. What comfort was there in ancient words when the valley had swallowed everyone she loved? Sarah closed her eyes, no longer sure if she was hoping to wake again or praying for the mercy of never opening them. The darkness inside the cave merged with the darkness behind her eyelids, and she let herself sink into it. Her last coherent thought, a question that would find no answer in the star-filled desert night. Why her? Why had she been spared when all the others had perished? The wind continued its mournful song through the canyon, and Sarah Mackenzie, sole survivor of a massacre that should have claimed her too, balanced on the knife's edge between life and death, waiting for fate to tip her one way or the other. The morning sun cast long shadows across the canyon floor as Dakota guided his paint mare through the familiar paths of his ancestors' land. At 23 winters, he moved with the fluid grace of one born to this harsh country, his dark eyes constantly scanning the horizon for danger. The recent raids by Mexican slavers had made even the bravest warriors cautious, and Dakota traveled alone by choice, scouting the southern passages for signs of intrusion. He had been tracking a small herd of desert bighorns since dawn, following their trail through the maze of red rock formations that twisted skyward like ancient prayers. The sheep would provide good meat for his band, who had made camp 2 days' ride to the north. But something else caught his attention, circling buzzards, their black forms stark against the morning sky. Death in the desert was common enough. The weak perished so the strong might live. It was the way of all things. Yet something about the birds' lazy spirals made him uneasy. They circled low, as if uncertain about their prize, occasionally dropping toward the earth only to rise again without landing. Dakota altered his course, urging his mare toward a cluster of caves he knew well from childhood hunts with his grandfather. As he drew closer, he noticed signs that made his warrior's instincts sharpen. disturbed earth. A torn piece of fabric caught on a thorny bush, dried blood on the rocks. Someone had passed this way recently. Someone desperate and careless about leaving a trail. He dismounted silently, tying his mare to a stubby mesquite tree before approaching on foot. His hand rested on the bone handle of his knife. Though he sensed no immediate threat, the blood was at least a day old, and whoever had left it was either gone or beyond posing any danger. The cave mouth yawned before him, dark and seemingly empty. But Dakota had learned long ago that appearances in the desert were often deceptive. He paused at the entrance, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. When he saw her, a white woman lay crumpled just inside the cave. So still she might have been dead if not for the barely perceptible rise and fall of her chest. Her dress, what remained of it, was torn and stained with blood and dirt. Her feet were bare and badly cut, her face drawn with exhaustion and suffering. Hair that might once have been neatly pinned now spread around her like a tangled web. Dakota's first instinct was to turn away. The problems of white people were not his concern, and involvement could only bring trouble to his band. The soldiers at Fort Buchanan were always looking for excuses to raid Apache camps, and a white woman found in their care, regardless of circumstances, would provide all the justification they needed. But something held him in place. Perhaps it was the way her fingers clutched at the cave floor even in unconsciousness, as if still fighting to survive. Perhaps it was the youth of her face, reminding him painfully of his younger sister, lost to the slavers 3 summers past. Or perhaps it was simply that leaving any creature to suffer went against everything his grandmother had taught him about walking in balance with the world. He approached cautiously, noting the defensive position she'd taken even in collapse. This was no pampered Eastern woman who'd simply gotten lost. She'd been running from something, or someone, and running hard. The state of her feet alone told him she'd covered significant ground without shoes. Kneeling beside her, Dakota could see the full extent of her condition. Dehydration had left her lips cracked and bleeding. Sunburn covered every exposed inch of skin. But it was the wound on her shoulder that concerned him most. A deep gash that had been bleeding steadily, soaking through the fabric of her dress. He reached for his water gourd, then hesitated. Once he gave her water, he would be committed to her survival. It was the way of his people. To save a life was to become responsible for it. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. The spirits test us not through our enemies, but through our choices when no one is watching. Dakota lifted her head gently, trickling water between her parched lips. She stirred slightly, a soft moan escaping her throat, but didn't wake. He wet a piece of cloth torn from his own shirt and placed it on her forehead, the fever heat of her skin alarming against his fingers. The shoulder wound needed immediate attention. He would have to move the torn fabric to properly assess the damage, working carefully, respectfully. He pulled back the damaged material just enough to expose the injury. The gash was deep but clean, likely from a fall rather than a weapon. It would need cleaning and binding if infection wasn't to set in. As he worked to clear away the dried blood, she suddenly came alive beneath his hands. Her eyes flew open, pale blue like winter sky, wide with terror. She tried to scramble backward, but her body betrayed her. Too weak to manage more than a feeble struggle. "No," she whispered, her voice raw as sand. "Please." Dakota raised his hands slowly, showing empty palms in the universal gesture of peace. He backed away slightly, giving her space while keeping his movements calm and unthreatening. Her eyes darted wildly, taking in his appearance, the long black hair bound with leather, the traditional dress of soft deerskin, the copper skin that marked him as her people's enemy. "End it," she whispered, and the words hit him like cold water. She thought he meant to kill her. Worse, she was asking him to. The defeat in her voice, the utter abandonment of hope, stirred something in him that he didn't care to examine too closely. "No," he said in English, the word feeling strange on his tongue. He'd learned the language from Mexican traders and the few peaceful encounters with American settlers, but rarely used it. "I help." She stared at him, confusion replacing fear in her expression. Her hand moved instinctively to her injured shoulder, and she winced at the pain the movement caused. Dakota reached again for the water gourd, moving slowly, letting her see every action. "Drink," he said, holding it toward her. She hesitated, pride warring with desperate need. Finally, survival instinct won, and she reached for the gourd with shaking hands. He helped steady it as she drank, careful not to let her take too much too quickly. "Why?" she asked when she'd finished, the single word carrying a weight of incomprehension. It was a fair question, one he wasn't sure he could answer even in his own language. Why was he helping her when her people had driven his from their ancestral lands? When soldiers bearing her nation's flag had slaughtered Apache women and children at Camp Grant, when everything in their two worlds stood in opposition. Instead of answering, he gestured to her shoulder. "Must clean. Stop blood." She looked down at the wound as if seeing it for the first time, then back at him. Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, exactly, but a resignation that was perhaps worse. She nodded slightly, working with practiced efficiency. Dakota cleaned the wound using water and crushed sage leaves from his medicine pouch. The woman bit her lip against the pain, but didn't cry out, showing a strength that raised his estimation of her. When he began wrapping the injury with strips torn from his shirt, she spoke again. "They killed them all," she said, her voice hollow. "My family, everyone, the wagons." Dakota's hands stilled momentarily. A wagon train massacre. He'd heard nothing of this from his band, which meant it hadn't been Apache work despite what the soldiers would surely claim. "Who?" he asked. "Men, bandits. They were looking for something." Her eyes grew distant, lost in memory. "They wore no uniforms, but they moved like soldiers. The leader had a scar." She traced a line down her left cheek. Dakota knew that description. Josiah Creech, a name whispered in Apache camps and Mexican villages alike. A slaver who traded in human misery, selling captives to the copper mines in Sonora or worse. His band had struck at Apache and Mexican settlements for years, always managing to stay ahead of both American and Mexican justice. "Creech," he said, and saw recognition flare in her eyes. "You know him?" "All know him. He is evil spirit made flesh." Dakota finished binding her shoulder. "You lucky to escape." "Lucky," she repeated bitterly. "Is that what this is?" He studied her face, seeing the wish for death still lingering in her eyes. His grandmother would have said such a spirit was already half departed, one foot in this world and one in the next. Bringing such a person back required more than healing their body. "Sun sets, sun rises, this is the way," he said, knowing the words were inadequate but having no better ones in her language. "You live. There is purpose in this." She turned away, but not before he caught the glimmer of tears she refused to shed. Strong, then, in more ways than one, among his people. Tears were not shame but release. Her people, it seemed, saw them differently. Dakota made his decision. He couldn't leave her here. Creech's men might still be searching for survivors, and even if they weren't, she wouldn't last another day in her condition. His band would not welcome a white woman, but there was a place, a hidden canyon with sweet water and game, where his grandfather had often gone to seek visions. It was 2 days' ride, but his mare was strong and sure-footed. "You come with me," he said, standing. Her eyes widened again. I won't make it." "You will." He extended his hand. "Or you stay. Choose." She looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then at the cave entrance where the buzzard still circled patiently. When she finally placed her trembling fingers in his palm, he felt the trust it cost her. This woman who had lost everything to violence, placing her life in the hands of one her people called savage. As he helped her to her feet, supporting her weight when her legs buckled, Dakota wondered if his grandfather's spirits were laughing at the irony. An Apache warrior and a white woman, bound together by circumstance and the shared understanding of what it meant to be hunted. Perhaps there was purpose in this after all. Though what that purpose might be, only time would reveal. The desert waited beyond the cave, harsh and unforgiving as always. But as Dakota helped the woman toward his patient mare, he thought he heard something else in the wind's whisper, the faintest suggestion that some meetings were not chance but destiny, and that the spirits moved in ways beyond human understanding. Sarah's first conscious thought was that she must be dead. No living person could feel so disconnected from their own body, floating in a strange space between dream and waking. Then the pain in her shoulder flared, sharp and insistent, dragging her back to unwelcome reality. She opened her eyes to find herself in an entirely different world from the cave. Soft morning light filtered through a covering of sewn hides above her, dappling everything in warm gold. The air smelled of sage smoke, leather, and something else, a medicinal scent that seemed to ease the throbbing in her shoulder. Panic seized her as memory returned in fragments. The Apache warrior, his strong arms lifting her onto a horse, the endless swaying journey through landscapes that blurred together in her fever. She tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate, weak as a newborn calf. "Be still!" The voice came from her left, and Sarah turned her head carefully to see him sitting cross-legged near a small fire. In the daylight filtering through the shelter, she could study him properly for the first time, younger than she'd first thought, perhaps only a few years older than her own 20 years. His face held a dignity that transcended age, with high cheekbones and intelligent eyes that watched her with calm assessment. "Where?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Safe place," he replied, his English careful and deliberate. "Hidden. No one comes here." Sarah's hand went instinctively to her shoulder, finding it freshly bandaged with clean cloth. Her torn dress had been supplemented with a soft deerskin blanket that covered her modestly. Someone, he, had tended to her injuries with obvious skill. "How long?" 2 days. Fever was strong. He rose smoothly and moved to where a water vessel sat near the shelter's entrance. "You must drink," as he helped her sit up enough to sip from the clay pot. Sarah fought against the confusion of her situation. Everything she'd been taught, every warning about the savage Apache, warred with the evidence before her eyes. This man had saved her life, carried her to safety, tended her wounds with gentleness her own mother couldn't have bettered. "My name is Sarah," she said when she'd finished drinking, feeling the absurd need for some form of civilized introduction. "Sarah Mackenzie." He nodded gravely. "I am called—" He paused, seeming to consider, then spoke a word in his own language that sounded like Dakota. "Dakota," she repeated, knowing she was mangling the pronunciation. A ghost of what might have been amusement crossed his features. "Means friend to all," he explained. "My grandmother chose it, said I would need such a name." Sarah wondered if his grandmother had foreseen this moment, her grandson nursing an enemy back to health. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. She could see it in the way his eyes grew distant. "Why did you save me?" The question had burned in her mind since that moment in the cave. Dakota was quiet for a long moment, feeding small sticks to the fire. "My sister," he finally said. "Taken by Creech's men 3 summers past. She was 14 winters." His voice carried a weight of pain carefully controlled. "I could not save her, but you I could save." The simplicity of it, the terrible arithmetic of loss and redemption, made Sarah's eyes sting with unshed tears. They sat in silence, 2 souls marked by similar wounds, separated by a chasm of culture and conflict, yet bound by shared understanding of grief. As the day progressed, Sarah grew stronger. Dakota brought her broth made from rabbit and wild herbs that soothed her stomach and seemed to ease the persistent ache in her muscles. He showed her the hidden canyon where they sheltered, a green jewel in the harsh desert, with a spring of sweet water and ancient cottonwoods providing shade. "This was sacred place for my people," he explained, gesturing to faded paintings on the canyon walls. "Now only I come here." "Why?" Sarah asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "My people driven north. Soldiers, settlers. No room for Apache in Apache land." The bitterness in his voice was carefully controlled, but present nonetheless. Sarah felt shame heat her cheeks. Her family had been part of that westward push, seeking their fortune in California gold fields. They'd never thought about who might already call these lands home, too focused on their own dreams of prosperity. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing how inadequate the words were. Dakota studied her face. "You did not take our land. You only wanted to live, like all creatures." He paused. "But Creech, he takes more than land. He takes spirit, sells people like horses. You've fought him. All Apache fight him, Mexican villages too, but he is like smoke, always slipping away." Dakota's hand unconsciously moved to a scar on his ribs she hadn't noticed before. "Last time we met, I was not ready. Next time will be different." As afternoon shadows lengthened, Sarah attempted to stand, determined to regain some independence. Her legs shook like autumn leaves, but she managed a few steps before Dakota moved to steady her. The contact was brief, his hand on her elbow, but Sarah felt it like a brand. When had another person's touch last conveyed such careful strength? "Tomorrow you will be stronger," he said, guiding her back to the blankets. "I need to get to Fort Buchanan," Sarah said, though the thought of leaving this peaceful sanctuary filled her with unexpected reluctance. "I have to report what happened. Those men need to be brought to justice." Dakota's expression darkened. "Soldiers will not care about wagon train. They will care about Apache warrior with white woman." The truth of it hit Sarah like cold water. What would the soldiers or any white settlement make of her story? A young woman alone with an Apache man for days? Her reputation would be destroyed. And Dakota, they would hang him without bothering to hear the truth. "Then what can I do?" Despair crept back into her voice. "Those men murdered my family. They can't just ride away free. Creech does not ride free. He rides with death following close. One day, death will catch him." Dakota's certainty was absolute. "But you must choose your path carefully. Truth and belief are not always friends among your people." That evening, as they shared a simple meal of roasted quail and wild onions, Sarah found herself studying her unlikely savior. He moved with an economy of motion she'd never seen in the boisterous men of her acquaintance. Every action had purpose, nothing wasted. When he spoke, which wasn't often, his words carried similar weight. "You speak English well," she observed. "Traders, some missionaries when I was young. They wanted to save Apache souls." His tone suggested what he thought of that effort. "I learned their words but kept my spirit." "Do you know any other languages?" "Spanish, some Mexican tongues, language of horses." At her questioning look, he almost smiled. "Horses speak clearest of all. No lies." Sarah thought of the horses screaming during the attack and shuddered. Dakota noticed immediately. "Bad memory?" She nodded, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. "I keep seeing it, hearing it, even when I close my eyes. This is natural. Spirit must release poison of such sights, or it festers." He moved to a leather pouch hanging from the shelter's support pole and withdrew something. "My grandmother's remedy. For sleep without dreams." The mixture smelled of mint and something earthier. Sarah hesitated. A lifetime of warnings about Indian potions warring with her growing trust in this man who'd shown her nothing but kindness. "It won't." She couldn't finish the question, embarrassed by her own prejudice. "Make you sleep only, nothing more." His eyes held steady on hers. "I do not save life to steal it through trickery." Ashamed of her suspicion, Sarah drank the bitter tea. Within minutes, a pleasant drowsiness began to steal over her limbs. As she settled back onto the blankets, she heard Dakota begin to sing softly in his own language, a low, rhythmic chant that seemed to weave through the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a nighthawk. "What is that song?" she asked sleepily. "Protection song. Keeps bad spirits away while spirit travels in sleep. Do you believe in spirits? I believe in what I see. Sun brings life. Water brings life. Songs bring peace." He continued the chant, and Sarah found herself drifting on its cadence. "Your God, my spirits, different words for same truth." As sleep claimed her, Sarah's last coherent thought was how strange it was to feel safe, here in the middle of nowhere, dependent on the kindness of a man her people called enemy. She felt more protected than she had in months. The song continued, weaving a barrier against nightmares. And for the first time since the attack, Sarah Mackenzie slept without seeing death behind her eyelids. She woke once in the night to find Dakota still maintaining his vigil. Silhouetted against the dying fire, he'd placed his knife within her reach, a gesture of trust that spoke louder than any words. As she drifted back to sleep, she wondered if he kept watch against external dangers or the internal ones that plagued survivors. Perhaps, she thought drowsily. There was no difference. The desert night wrapped around their small shelter, vast and eternal, caring nothing for the human divisions of race and culture under its ancient gaze. They were simply two wounded souls finding unexpected solace in shared humanity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, decisions to be made, paths to choose. But tonight, protected by song and fire and the simple kindness of an unlikely guardian, Sarah allowed herself to believe that survival might be more than just drawing breath. In his quiet way, Dakota had shown her a truth her civilized world had never taught. Sometimes grace came from the most unexpected directions, wearing faces we'd been trained to fear, as the protection song rose and fell with the rhythm of the wind. Sarah Mackenzie began the long journey back from despair, guided by the patient wisdom of a man who understood that healing, like trust, could not be rushed. The days in the hidden canyon began to blur together, marked by the steady rhythm of healing and quiet companionship. Sarah grew stronger, her shoulder mending cleanly under Dakota's careful ministrations. On the 5th morning, she finally found the courage to speak of what haunted her nights despite his protective songs. They weren't just bandits, she said, breaking the comfortable silence of their shared breakfast. The way they moved through the wagons, they were looking for something specific. Dakota set aside his bowl of pine nut mush, giving her his full attention. What did they seek? I don't know, but they found it in the Hartley wagon. Mr. Hartley was a surveyor, heading to map territories for the railroad companies. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering. They tore through his papers like madmen, and when they found what they wanted, their leader, Creech, he smiled. Such a terrible smile. Railroad brings many problems. Dakota said thoughtfully, land grants, secret routes, much money in such knowledge. Sarah hadn't considered this angle. You think they killed 18 people for survey maps? Men kill for less. But Creech, Dakota's expression darkened. He serves many masters, information to highest bidder, people to slave minds, weapons to those who pay. Your people call him bandit. He is worse. He is merchant of misery. The weight of this settled over Sarah like a shroud. Her family had died not in random violence, but as casualties in some larger game of greed and power. The senselessness of it made her stomach turn. My father kept a journal, she said suddenly. He wrote everything down, people we met, conversations, business dealings. If Creech's men missed it, she trailed off, remembering with painful clarity that she'd fled with nothing. Where did he keep this journal? In his coat, always. Sarah's voice broke slightly. He's buried with it now, if he's buried at all. Dakota was quiet for a moment. The dead keep their secrets, but living must seek justice. You say you will go to Fort. I know another way. He explained his plan with careful detail. His band traded sometimes with Mexican settlements to the south, places where Creech was equally hated. The alcalde of Agua Prieta had lost 2 sons to the slavers and would gladly share information about Creech's movements and allies. More importantly, the Mexican authorities might act where American soldiers would not. But your people, Sarah protested. Won't they? My people survive by knowing when to fight and when to trade. A white woman's testimony about Creech could be valuable. He paused. If you are willing to trust Apache guidance. The irony wasn't lost on her, seeking justice for her family's murder by allying with those her people considered enemies. Yet, what choice did she have? Dakota had proven himself more honorable than any white man she'd encountered in the territories. I trust you, she said simply, and saw something flicker in his dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of a bridge being built between worlds. That afternoon, Dakota began teaching her essential survival skills. If something happens to me, you must be able to find water, make fire, know which plants heal and which harm. Nothing's going to happen to you, Sarah said quickly, disturbed by the thought. Desert makes no promises. He showed her how to read the landscape for signs of water, the particular green of cottonwoods, the way birds flew at certain times of day. Your people follow maps. Apache follow life. Sarah proved a quick student, her natural intelligence overcoming her civilized squeamishness. She learned to identify edible plants, to make fire with sticks and dried grass, to move silently across gravel and sand. Dakota was a patient teacher, correcting without condescension, praising progress with subtle nods. You're not what I expected, she admitted one evening as they practiced snare setting by the spring. What did you expect? Sarah flushed, embarrassed by her preconceptions. I don't know. Everything I was told, it was all lies, wasn't it? Not all lies. Apache can be fierce. We take what we need to survive. We raid those who raid us. He adjusted her hands on the sinew cord. But your people see only the war face, never the whole person. What's the whole person? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Dakota considered this. Man who sings to his horse, who knows name of every star, who mourns a sister. His voice dropped on the last words. Who saves strange white women from caves? Despite the sadness in his tone, Sarah found herself almost smiling. Very strange white women. Yes, who argue with fever dreams and try to walk on broken feet. This time she caught the definite glimmer of humor in his eyes. My grandmother would say the spirits have much laughter, sending me such a student. As the days passed, their careful formality began to ease into something resembling friendship. Sarah discovered that Dakota possessed a dry wit that emerged in unexpected moments. He found amusement in her attempts to pronounce Apache words, though he never mocked, only repeated them with exaggerated patience until she got them right. This word means stubborn as mule, she asked after a particularly difficult lesson. No, means Sarah trying to speak Apache. At her indignant expression, he added, but is almost same thing. She threw a pine cone at him, which he dodged easily, and they both found themselves laughing, a sound that surprised them both. When had laughter become possible again? One night, a fierce sandstorm swept through the canyons, trapping them in the shelter as wind howled like vengeful spirits outside. The hide walls shook and strained, and Sarah found herself unconsciously moving closer to where Dakota sat maintaining the fire. Storm will pass, he said calmly. Shelter is strong. I'm not frightened, Sarah said quickly, though they both knew it was a lie. The storm's violence reminded her too much of other chaos, other terror. Fear is not shame. Fear keeps us alive. He fed another stick to the fire. I fear many things. You? Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. What could you possibly fear? Losing more family. Seeing my people fade like morning mist. Growing old in world with no place for Apache ways. He was quiet for a moment. I fear becoming like Creech, letting hate poison spirit until only vengeance remains. The raw honesty of his words made Sarah's throat tight. You could never be like him. All men have darkness. Choice is whether we feed it. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the scar she'd noticed on his ribs. When sister was taken, I wanted to burn world. Grandmother stopped me. Said vengeance is trap that catches hunter worse than prey. But you still search for him. For Creech. Justice is not vengeance. One heals, one poisons. He looked at her directly. You understand this? Sarah thought of her own burning need to see Creech pay for what he'd done. Was it justice she sought, or revenge? Could she tell the difference anymore? I want him to hang, she said honestly. I want him to know fear like my family knew fear. Does that make me poisoned? Makes you human? Question is what you do with wanting. They sat in companionable silence as the storm raged outside, each lost in thought. Sarah found herself studying Dakota's profile in the firelight, noting the strength in his features tempered by unexpected gentleness. When he'd first pulled back her torn dress to tend her wounds, she'd been too delirious to feel anything but pain. Now, remembering his careful hands and respectful manner, she felt something else entirely, a warmth that had nothing to do with fever. "Dakota," she said softly, "do you think, in another world, could our peoples have been friends?" He turned to look at her, and for a moment, the space between them seemed charged with possibilities unspoken. In this world, two people are friends. Is that not enough? Sarah felt her heart skip strangely. When had this man, this Apache warrior she should fear, become essential to her sense of safety? When had his presence become not just comforting but necessary? "It's enough," she whispered, and knew she meant more than friendship, more than gratitude. Knew too that such feelings were impossible, dangerous, forbidden by every law of both their peoples. Dakota held her gaze a moment longer, and she thought she saw her own confusion reflected there, the pull of something neither had expected or sought. Then he turned back to the fire, the moment passing like smoke. "Storm weakens. Tomorrow we begin journey to Agua Prieta." His voice had returned to its usual measured calm. "You must rest." But sleep eluded Sarah long after the storm passed. She lay listening to Dakota's quiet movements as he checked the shelter's security, her mind spinning with realizations she didn't dare examine too closely. Somewhere between the cave and this moment, everything had shifted. The man who'd saved her life had become something more: friend, protector, teacher, and perhaps, her traitorous heart whispered, something else entirely. Something that had no name in either of their languages because it wasn't supposed to exist. As dawn approached, painting the canyon walls in shades of rose and gold, Sarah made a decision. Whatever lay ahead, justice or disappointment, acceptance or rejection, she would face it with this unexpected ally at her side. The world might condemn them for the bridge they were building across cultures, but here in this hidden place, such bridges seemed not just possible, but necessary. She rose to help Dakota prepare for their journey, and when their hands touched accidentally while packing supplies, neither pulled away quite as quickly as they should have. The desert had taught them both about survival. Now, perhaps, it had lessons about living as well. The journey south tested every skill Dakota had taught her. They traveled by night when possible, resting in hidden arroyos during the scorching days. Sarah had fashioned makeshift moccasins from hide scraps, but her feet still protested the harsh terrain. She didn't complain, wouldn't give voice to discomfort when Dakota moved through the same landscape as if born to it, which, she reminded herself, he was. On the third night, they camped beneath a massive boulder formation that looked like praying hands against the star-filled sky. The moon hung low and orange, casting everything in amber light. Sarah had grown comfortable with their evening routine, gathering wood while Dakota hunted, preparing simple meals, sharing water with careful conservation. "Tomorrow we reach the trading post at Skeleton Canyon," Dakota said, sketching a map in the dirt with a stick. "There we must be careful. Many eyes, not all friendly. Will they—" Sarah hesitated. "What will they think, seeing us together?" "They will think what they choose to think. We cannot control this." He looked up at her. "You have different story ready?" She did. They'd rehearsed it. She was a missionary's daughter, separated from her group, hired him as guide. It felt wrong to lie, but the truth would serve no one. "I know the words," she said. "I just wonder if I can speak them convincingly. You survived Creech. You can survive questions." His faith in her strength was touching, if misplaced. Sarah felt anything but strong. That night, she struggled to sleep. The vastness of the sky made her feel small and vulnerable. When she did doze, nightmares clawed at her, her mother's scream, Thomas's wide eyes, blood soaking into sand. She woke gasping to find Dakota already alert, his hand on his knife. "Just dreams," she whispered, embarrassed. He relaxed but moved closer, settling within arm's reach. Dreams have power, speak them, and they lose strength. So she did, haltingly at first, then with growing fluency. She told him about finding her mother's locket in the dirt, about the vultures that had seemed so patient, about the terrible silence after the gunfire stopped. He listened without interruption, his presence solid as the rocks around them. "My sister's name was Ayana," he said when she finished. "Means eternal blossom." She laughed like spring rain. His voice carried infinite sadness. "I was away hunting when Creech came, found only tracks and blood. For 3 moons I searched, found nothing." Sarah's hand moved without conscious thought, covering his where it rested on his knee. His skin was warm, calloused from years of survival. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing how inadequate it was. He turned his hand palm up, fingers closing gently around hers. Sorrow shared weighs less. They sat that way as the moon tracked across the sky, hands linked in simple human comfort. Sarah knew she should pull away, knew this crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed, but the warmth of human connection after so much loss was impossible to refuse. "Dakota," she said softly, "what will you do when this is over? When Creech is brought to justice? Return to my people. Try to help them find new ways in changing world." He paused. "And you?" The question she'd been avoiding. "I don't know. I have no family left, no money, no home to return to. You have skills now, desert skills, mountain skills." His thumb moved almost imperceptibly against her palm. "And you have friend." Friend. Such a simple word for what was growing between them. Sarah felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "Do I? Even when this is over?" "Apache do not give friendship lightly. Once given, it remains." She wanted to ask if friendship was all he offered, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she squeezed his hand once and let go, wrapping herself in her blanket. Some questions were better left unasked, some boundaries better left uncrossed, but sleep, when it finally came, was free of nightmares. The next evening brought them to Skeleton Canyon, named for the bleached bones that littered its entrance, remnants of some long-ago battle. The trading post squatted like a toad against the canyon wall, rough adobe and timber construction that had seen better decades. Smoke rose from a chimney pipe, and Sarah could hear voices within, English, Spanish, and languages she couldn't identify. "Stay close," Dakota murmured. "Speak only if spoken to. Trust no one fully." They entered to find a room thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. A dozen men sat at rough tables or leaned against the bar. Traders, prospectors, drifters, and harder types whose profession was written in the guns they wore. Conversation died as they appeared in the doorway. Sarah felt the weight of every gaze, reading the assumptions in their eyes. Her improvised clothing, part salvaged dress, part Apache hide, told a story she couldn't control. Dakota's presence beside her raised eyebrows and sparked whispered speculation. The proprietor, a mountain of a man with graying whiskers, looked them over with shrewd eyes. Well, don't often see such unusual pairings. "You lost, miss?" Sarah lifted her chin, finding strength in the role they'd created. "Not lost, sir. Separated from my father's missionary group near San Carlos, this man agreed to guide me to safety." "Missionary, eh?" The man's smile held no warmth. "Funny, you don't look like any missionary's daughter I've seen. Bit too much Apache decoration for gospel work." Before Sarah could respond, a voice from the corner made her blood freeze. Now that's interesting. Very interesting indeed. A lean man unfolded from the shadows, moving with predatory grace. Not Creech himself, but she recognized the type. One of his scouts, perhaps, or riders. The way his eyes lingered on her made her skin crawl. "Seems I recall hearing about a wagon train got hit up north. Terrible tragedy. No survivors, they said." His smile was all teeth. "Course, sometimes reports get things wrong." Dakota shifted slightly, positioning himself between Sarah and the threat. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. The room's atmosphere grew electric with potential violence. "Many wagons travel these lands," Dakota said evenly. "Many tragedies. The desert takes its share." "That it does. Apache. That it does." The man's hand rested casually on his pistol. Still, might be someone would pay well for news of survivors. Certain interested parties. You understand. Sarah's mind raced. If this man reported back to Creech, they'd be hunted before dawn. But showing fear would confirm suspicions. She forced herself to step around Dakota, meeting the scout's gaze directly. I don't know what wagon train you mean, sir. I've been traveling with my father's group for months. Perhaps you could direct us to the nearest army post? I'm sure they'd be interested to hear about these tragedies you mention. It was a gamble, invoking the army's authority. The scout's eyes narrowed, calculating odds. After a moment that stretched like eternity, he shrugged. Fort Bowie's 3 days north, though I'd be careful on the roads. Dangerous times for travelers. His meaning was clear. We'll be watching. They left shortly after, purchasing minimal supplies with the few coins Dakota carried. Sarah didn't breathe easily until they were miles from the trading post, having doubled back twice to confuse any followers. He knew, she said unnecessarily. Yes, we must move fast now. Reach Agua Prieta before word spreads. They pushed harder that night, covering ground at a pace that left Sarah gasping. When dawn forced them to shelter, Dakota chose a defensive position high in the rocks, with clear views of all approaches. I've put you in danger, Sarah said, guilt eating at her. You should leave me. Save yourself. Dakota looked at her as if she'd suggested he cut off his own arm. You think Apache abandons friends to wolves? I think you've done enough. More than enough. She forced herself to continue. Your people need you. I won't have your death on my conscience, too. He moved closer, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes. My life, my choice. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You are not burden. Sarah Mackenzie, you are... He stopped, searching for words in a language not his own. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she leaned into his touch, knowing they balanced on a precipice more dangerous than any canyon. I am what? She whispered. Instead of answering, he lowered his forehead to rest against hers, an intimacy somehow more profound than a kiss. They breathed the same air, shared the same space between heartbeats, while the desert wind sang its ancient song around them. You are possibility, he finally said, pulling back with visible effort. In world of closed doors, you are window, but some possibilities are impossible, she finished, though the words tasted like ash. I know, but knowing and accepting were different things. As Dakota turned to scan the horizon, Sarah pressed her fingers to where his hand had touched her face, holding warmth that had nothing to do with desert sun. They were 2 days from Agua Prieta, racing against time and rumor, but in that moment, with danger closing in and the future uncertain, Sarah allowed herself one dangerous truth. She was falling in love with a man she could never have, in a world that would never accept them. The desert had taught her about survival. Now it was teaching her that the heart, like water, would find its own path regardless of the obstacles placed before it. Whether that path led to an oasis or over a cliff remained to be seen. As the sun climbed higher, forcing them to rest in what shelter they could find, Sarah made a promise to herself. Whatever happened in Agua Prieta, whatever justice or injustice awaited, she would protect this man who had saved not just her life, but her spirit. The world might condemn them, but she would not let him pay the price for her salvation. The trading post scout would report to Creech. The hunt would intensify. But for now, for these precious hours, they were simply two souls in the vast desert, bound by something stronger than convention and deeper than either dared name. The town of Agua Prieta materialized from the desert heat like a mirage made real. Adobe buildings clustered around a dusty plaza where a tired fountain struggled against the drought. They approached at dusk, when honest folk were settling in for supper and less honest ones were beginning their night's work. Dakota had changed his appearance as much as possible, binding his hair differently and wearing a Mexican serape that covered his Apache dress. Sarah had reluctantly traded her torn dress for the simple cotton skirt and blouse of a local woman, purchased from a traveling merchant they'd encountered. Still, they drew stares as they made their way through the narrow streets. The alcalde lives there. Dakota indicated a larger building with wooden doors carved in the Spanish style. But first, we find my contact. The contact proved to be an ancient Mexican woman who ran a small cantina on the plaza's edge. Maria Esperanza greeted Dakota with a flood of rapid Spanish and suspicious glances at Sarah. Only when he explained in the same language, Sarah caught her own name and Creech among the unfamiliar words, did the woman's expression soften marginally. Si, Maria said, switching to accented English for Sarah's benefit. The Apache boy tells me you seek justice for your family. This Creech, he is devil walking. Come, we talk inside. The cantina's back room was cramped but private, over cups of bitter coffee. Maria confirmed what they'd feared. Word of a survivor from the wagon train massacre had already reached certain ears. 2 days ago, riders come through, they ask questions, flash gold coins. Maria's weathered face creased with disgust. But Agua Prieta remembers it's dead. We tell them nothing. Will the alcalde help us? Sarah asked. Don Francisco lost 2 sons to the slavers. He will listen, but... Maria hesitated, looking between them. An Apache man and white woman together. This raises other questions. You must have care. They waited until full dark before venturing to the alcalde's residence. Don Francisco Mendoza proved to be a thin, elegant man whose grief had carved deep lines around his eyes. He received them in his study, listening without interruption as Sarah recounted the massacre and what she'd overheard about Creech's interest in the surveyor's papers. Railroad maps, Don Francisco said when she finished. Yes, this makes sense. There are men, American and Mexican both, who would pay fortunes for advanced knowledge of routes. Land can be bought cheap before the railroad comes. Sold dear after. But surely the railroad companies would have copies? Sarah protested. Official copies. Yes, but private surveys. Alternate routes marked with water sources. Mineral deposits. The alcalde's smile was grim. Such information is worth killing for, señorita. He promised to send word to the Mexican authorities and to the American marshal in Tucson. A man he trusted, but he warned them against staying in Agua Prieta. Creech has eyes everywhere. Already there are whispers about the Apache who brings a white woman to town. By morning, he spread his hands expressively. They were given shelter for the night in the church, neutral ground even Creech's men wouldn't violate. Sarah knelt in a pew, trying to pray, but found her thoughts too scattered. Dakota stood by a window, keeping watch, his silhouette stark against the moonlight. We should separate, he said without turning. You stay with the priest until the marshal comes. I will disappear into the mountains. No. The word came out harsher than she intended. Sarah rose and moved to stand beside him. We've come too far together. Together brings danger to both. And apart? Do you think Creech will spare me because you're gone, or spare you because I'm hidden? She touched his arm, feeling the tension thrumming through him. Our fates are linked now, whether we will it or not. He turned to face her, and she saw her own fears reflected in his eyes. In my dreams, he said quietly, I see different ending to this story, but dreams are not truth. What ending? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. One where world is different, where Apache and white can... He stopped, jaw tightening. Foolish dreams. Before Sarah could respond, the church door burst open. 3 armed men entered, their intent clear despite their attempts at casual swagger. Sarah recognized one from the trading post, the scout who'd questioned them. Well, praying for your sins. Miss, the leader, a thick-set man with pale eyes, smiled unpleasantly. Mister, Creech sends his regards. Wants a word with you both. This is sanctuary, Sarah said, surprised by her own steady voice. You have no right. Rights are for courtrooms. Missy, out here, we make our own law. He gestured with his rifle. Now you can come quiet-like, or we can do this ugly. Your choice. Dakota had shifted position slightly, ready to fight despite the odds. Sarah caught his eye, saw him measuring distances and possibilities. 3 armed men in a confined space, even his skills had limits. If we come quietly, she said. What guarantee do we have? Mr. Creech wants information, not blood, though he ain't particular about methods, if you take my meaning. The threat hung heavy in the air. Apache there might not fare so well, but you'll leave breathing if you're smart. Sarah felt rage rise in her throat like bile. These men had slaughtered her family without thought, and now they bargained with lives like poker chips. But before she could speak, other voices rose outside, many voices, speaking rapid Spanish. The church door opened again, revealing Don Francisco backed by at least a dozen armed townsmen. Maria Esperanza was there too, clutching an ancient shotgun with practiced ease. Señores, the alcalde said pleasantly, you seem to have lost your way. The church is closed for private prayer. The outlaws' leader scowled. This ain't your business. Mendoza, we're here on private matter. Everything in Agua Prieta is my business. These people are under my protection. Don Francisco's pleasant tone never wavered, but steel showed beneath. You will leave now, or you will leave in boxes. Choose quickly. My men grow impatient. The mathematics were clear, 3 against 15, with more townspeople gathering. The outlaws backed toward the door. The leader's face twisted with fury. This ain't over, he snarled. Creech has long memory and longer reach, as do I. Don Francisco replied, Tell your master that Agua Prieta remembers its dead. Tell him justice comes on swift wings. After the outlaws left, Sarah found herself shaking with delayed reaction. Dakota's hand found hers, steady and warm. You must leave tonight. Don Francisco said urgently, I will give you escort to the border, but then you must find your own way. The marshal in Tucson, Sam Morrison. He is honest man. Find him. Tell him everything. Why help us? Sarah asked. You risk much. The alcalde's eyes grew distant. My sons were good boys. Worked hard. Loved their mother. Creech took them for slaves because they were young and strong. They died in the mines within 6 months. He focused on Sarah again. If your testimony can hang that devil, then every risk is worth taking. Within an hour, they were riding north with 6 Mexican vaqueros as escort. Dakota had acquired horses, Sarah didn't ask how, and they made good time across the moonlit desert, at a river marking the international boundary. Their escort turned back with wishes for good fortune and justice. Alone again in the vast darkness, Sarah and Dakota pushed on toward Tucson. The horses were steady, the night clear, but both knew their time was running short. Creech would not accept this setback quietly. When we reach Tucson, Dakota said, you must tell Marshal I forced you, say I threatened you, made you come with me. I will not lie about you, not after everything. Whoa, truth will not protect Apache in white man's town. Then we make new truth, one where justice matters more than skin color. Sarah heard the naivety in her own words, but refused to take them back. If they won't listen, we'll make them listen. Dakota reined in his horse, turning to study her in the moonlight. You are, strange woman, Sarah Mackenzie, because I believe in justice, because you believe in impossible things. But his voice held wonder rather than mockery. My grandmother would say you have spirit of changing wind, one that blows away old ways. And what do you say? He was quiet for a long moment, then urged his horse forward again. I say we ride for Tucson and let spirits decide rest. But as they rode through the remainder of the night, Sarah caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read, part admiration, part sorrow, part something else that made her heart race despite the danger surrounding them. Whatever awaited in Tucson, she knew their journey together was approaching its end. The thought filled her with a grief almost as sharp as what she'd felt standing among the ruins of the wagon train. The desert began to lighten with pre-dawn glow, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere ahead lay Tucson and the possibility of justice. Behind them, Creech's shadow lengthened with each passing hour, and between them, unspoken but undeniable, grew a connection that defied every convention their worlds had built. Look, Dakota said suddenly, pointing to the eastern sky where the morning star still burned bright against the coming dawn. Apache say that star guides lost souls home. Perhaps it guides us too. Sarah followed his gaze, allowing herself one moment of hope. Perhaps in seeking justice for the dead, they might yet find a path for the living. The star flickered like a promise, and she chose to believe it. Tucson sprawled before them in the harsh morning light, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures that seemed to huddle together against the desert's vastness. The old pueblo, as locals called it, straddled two worlds uneasily, neither fully American nor Mexican, but something altogether its own. Sarah pulled her borrowed shawl higher despite the growing heat, acutely aware of how she must appear, trail-worn, sun-darkened, riding alongside an Apache warrior. The few early risers they passed stopped to stare, whispers trailing in their wake like dust. "The marshal's office is near the plaza," Dakota said, his voice carefully neutral. They both knew what came next, the test of whether American justice would prove more honorable than American prejudice. Marshal Sam Morrison proved to be a weathered man in his 50s, with intelligent gray eyes that missed nothing. He received them in his office, a sparse room dominated by wanted posters and a rack of rifles. Sarah noted with relief that he listened without interruption as she told her story, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Josiah Creech," he said when she finished, the name bitter on his tongue. "Been hunting that bastard for 3 years. Pardon my language, miss. You believe me then?" "Ma'am, I've got a stack of complaints about Creech tall as my desk. Problem is, he's smart, never leaves witnesses, always operates just outside jurisdiction." Morrison's eyes shifted to Dakota. "You're the one pulled her from that cave." Dakota nodded once, meeting the marshal's gaze steadily. "Must have taken some sand, bringing her here. Your people and mine ain't exactly friendly." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "But Don Francisco's message vouches for you both. Man's got good judgment, even if he is Mexican." Sarah felt a flutter of hope. "Then you'll help us? You'll arrest Creech?" "If I could find him, surely, but he's gone to ground since you escaped." "My guess is he's holed up in the Dragoon Mountains, maybe trying to sell those survey maps to the highest bidder." Morrison stood, pacing to the window. "I've sent word to Fort Bowie and the territorial governor. With your testimony, we might finally have enough to hang him proper." "How long?" Dakota asked. "Week, maybe 2, for proper warrants and support. You'll need to stay in town. Miss, I'll arrange lodging." "She stays with me," Dakota interrupted, then seemed to catch himself. "If she chooses, I have made camp outside town." Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "That might raise some talk." "Talk is wind," Dakota replied. "Creech's bullets are not." The marshal couldn't argue with that logic. He arranged for Sarah to give a formal deposition to the circuit judge, who happened to be in town. Judge William Thornberry was a stern man who questioned her extensively, but Sarah held to her truth despite his skepticism about certain details. "You claim this Apache man treated you with complete propriety?" the judge asked. Pen poised over paper. "More propriety than many white men I've encountered," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze directly. "He saved my life, Your Honor. He risked his own to bring me to justice." The judge made notes. "Most irregular, but your account of the massacre aligns with other intelligence we've received. Very well. Miss Mackenzie, your testimony is recorded." That evening, Sarah found herself at Dakota's camp, a sheltered spot by a creek outside town limits. He'd built a small fire and was roasting rabbit when she arrived, having declined the marshal's offer of a hotel room. "You should have stayed in town," he said without looking up. "Would be safer. Safer from Creech, or safer from gossip." Sarah settled beside the fire, suddenly exhausted. "I'm tired of worrying what people think. Easy to say, harder when stones fly." His voice carried weight of experience. They ate in companionable silence, the creek murmuring nearby. Sarah found herself studying him in the firelight, memorizing features she might soon have to forget. The strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when something amused him, the graceful economy of his movements. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her stare. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That after this is over, I don't know who I'll be. Before, I was a merchant's daughter heading to California. Now," she gestured helplessly, "I don't belong anywhere. Belonging is here." Dakota touched his chest, not in others' eyes. "Is that why you can move between worlds? Apache, Mexican, American? I am always Apache, but Apache must adapt or vanish like morning mist." His expression grew distant. "My grandfather saw this truth, taught me to learn enemies' ways without losing our own. Am I your enemy?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Dakota looked at her for a long moment. "You were never enemy. Sarah Mackenzie, from first moment in cave, you were—" He paused, searching for words. "You were test from spirits, challenge to everything I thought I knew. And did you pass this test? I think test is not finished." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I think perhaps test has no ending." Sarah's heart hammered as he reached out, fingers barely brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, but it sent lightning through her entire body. "Dakota," she whispered, not sure if it was warning or invitation. "I know," he replied, hand dropping. "I know all reasons this cannot be. Your people, my people, your God, my spirits, your world, my world." His voice roughened with emotion usually kept carefully controlled. "But knowing changes nothing of what I feel." "What do you feel?" Sarah could barely breathe. Instead of answering in words, he cupped her face in both hands, thumbs tracing her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. His eyes asked permission, and Sarah answered by leaning into his touch, her own hands coming up to cover his. The kiss, when it came, was soft as desert rain, tentative at first, then deeper as the impossible rightness of it overwhelmed every rational objection. Sarah had been kissed before, chased pecks from would-be suitors back in Missouri, but this was different. This was coming home to a place she'd never known existed. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Dakota rested his forehead against hers as he had once before. "Now we are truly lost," he murmured. "Or found," Sarah countered, surprising herself with her boldness. "Maybe we were lost before, and now we're found." They held each other as the fire burned low, not speaking of tomorrow or the days after. There would be time for harsh realities, for choosing between impossible options. But tonight, with stars wheeling overhead and the creek singing its ancient song, they allowed themselves this moment of grace. The next days passed in strange suspension. Sarah gave additional testimony, worked with a sketch artist to capture Creech's scarred face, met with various officials who treated her with mixtures of sympathy and suspicion. Through it all, Dakota remained her constant, never entering the town proper but always waiting at the camp, a sanctuary from the day's trials. Word came that patrols had found the massacre site, confirming Sarah's account in gruesome detail. They'd also found her father's journal, missed by the killers in their haste. The entries revealed that the surveyor Hartley had indeed discovered something significant, a pass through the mountains that would save the railroad millions, plus indications of rich copper deposits along the route. Worth killing for indeed, Morrison said grimly. "We've got reports of strangers asking questions in Benson and Tombstone. Creech is getting desperate to unload those maps before we catch up." But catching up proved difficult. Creech had survived this long by being cunning, and he seemed to sense the net closing. False sightings led patrols on wild chases. Informants disappeared or were found dead. The week Morrison had predicted stretched to 2, then 3, during this time. Sarah faced another challenge. Well-meaning townswomen, horrified by her situation, attempted to intervene. Mrs. Abigail Whitman, wife of a prominent merchant, arrived at the marshal's office while Sarah was reviewing wanted posters. "My dear Miss Mackenzie," she began, her tone dripping condescension disguised as concern. "This simply won't do. A young woman of good family, camping with a savage? You must think of your reputation." "My reputation died with my family, Mrs. Whitman," Sarah replied evenly. What survives is my life, which I owe to that savage you speak of. But surely now that you're safe among civilized people— Civilized? Sarah's temper finally snapped. Was it civilized when Creech's men slaughtered 18 innocent people? Is it civilized that he still rides free because the law can't touch him? That man you call savage has shown me more true civilization than— She broke off, seeing the shock on Mrs. Whitman's face. The woman departed in a rustle of offended dignity, but Sarah knew there would be others. The price of choosing her own path would be paid in whispers and turned backs. That evening, she found Dakota unusually quiet, staring into the fire with troubled eyes. "The town talks," he said without preamble. "They say things about you, because of me. Let them talk. Sarah," he turned to face her fully, "when Creech is caught, when justice is done, what then? You cannot live between worlds forever. Must choose." "What if I don't want to choose? What if I want to make new world where Apache and White can what? Marry? Raise children who belong nowhere?" His voice carried pain sharp as flint. "I have seen such children, rejected by both peoples. Would not wish that fate on anyone." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "So this ends when Creech hangs. We simply part ways and pretend none of it happened?" "Not pretend, never pretend." He pulled her close, holding her as if she might disappear. "But sometimes loving means letting go, protecting from harm, even harm of being together." They clung to each other as night deepened around them, each heartbeat marking time they couldn't hold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressures to conform to their separate worlds. But tonight, they had this: the crackle of fire, the vast desert sky, and love that asked nothing but to exist, however briefly. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human pain, while two hearts broke slowly in the darkness, knowing that some bridges, once built, must be burned for the safety of those who dared to cross them. But not yet, not tonight. Tonight, they would hold the impossible and call it precious, storing up warmth against the cold days ahead. The attack came at dawn, shattering the peaceful morning with gunfire and war cries. Sarah jolted awake to find Dakota already moving, pressing his rifle into her hands while reaching for his bow. "Creech," he said grimly. "Finally shows his face." The outlaws had surrounded the creek camp, at least a dozen men, including Creech himself, his scarred face unmistakable even in the dim light. They'd chosen their moment well, attacking before the town was fully awake. "Mackenzie, woman," Creech's voice rang out. "You've cost me considerable trouble. Time to settle accounts." Stay down," Dakota whispered, positioning himself between Sarah and the attackers. "When I give signal, run for town. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving you." Her protest was cut short as the outlaws opened fire. Bullets whined through the air, thudding into trees and sending sprays of dirt skyward. Dakota returned fire with deadly accuracy, his movements fluid as water, but they were vastly outnumbered. Then, impossibly, Sarah heard another sound, hoofbeats thundering from the direction of town. Marshal Morrison appeared with a posse of deputies, having been alerted by the gunfire. The tide turned quickly as Creech's men found themselves caught between two forces. "Surrender, Creech!" Morrison shouted. "You're surrounded!" But Creech, desperate and cornered, made one last play, breaking from cover. He charged directly at Sarah's position, pistol raised. Time seemed to slow as Sarah saw death in his eyes, the same look her family must have seen in their final moments. Dakota moved faster than thought, throwing himself between them. The bullet meant for Sarah caught him in the side, spinning him to the ground. Sarah screamed, raising the rifle he'd given her and firing purely on instinct. Her shot took Creech in the shoulder, sending his next shot wild. The scarred outlaw stumbled, tried to raise his gun again, but Morrison's men cut him down in a hail of bullets. Josiah Creech crumpled to the earth, his reign of terror ending in the dust beside a desert creek. But Sarah barely noticed. She was already at Dakota's side, pressing her hands against the wound that leaked crimson through his fingers. "No, no, no," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You can't. I won't let you. Sarah. His voice was strained but steady. Look at me. She met his eyes, seeing pain but also peace. You saved me. Again. Was my choice, my honor. He touched her face with a blood-stained hand. You must live, Sarah Mackenzie. Live for both of us. Together, she said fiercely. We live together or not at all. The marshal's men were securing prisoners and checking the dead, but Morrison himself knelt beside them. Doc's on his way, he said. Apache's tough. He'll make it. The next hours blurred together. Dr. Marcus Reed, a former Army surgeon, worked with steady hands to extract the bullet and stop the bleeding. Sarah refused to leave, holding Dakota's hand through it all, whispering prayers in English and fumbling attempts at Apache words he'd taught her. When Dakota finally opened his eyes in the doctor's back room, Sarah was there, looking haggard but fiercely determined. You're still here, he murmured. Where else would I be? She squeezed his hand. Creech is dead. His men are arrested or killed. It's over. No, Dakota said softly. Now it begins. Now you must choose your path. Over the following days, as Dakota recovered with remarkable speed, Tucson found itself divided. Some called Sarah a hero for helping bring down Creech. Others whispered about the impropriety of her closeness to an Apache warrior. But something had shifted in the wake of the attack. Several townspeople had witnessed Dakota's sacrifice, his willingness to die protecting Sarah. The doctor spoke admiringly of his strength and stoicism. Even Mrs. Whitman, faced with the evidence of such devotion, found her prejudices shaken. Perhaps, she said stiffly to Sarah. I was hasty in my judgment. Your friend acted with great nobility. It was Marshal Morrison who provided an unexpected solution. Miss Mackenzie, he said, visiting her at the doctor's house. I've been in contact with the railroad company. They're mighty grateful for the return of those maps and the information about the copper deposits. Grateful enough to offer a reward. And a job. A job. They need someone to help establish schools for the railroad workers' children. Someone who understands both American and Mexican customs, maybe even Apache ways. Someone who's proven they can bridge different worlds. He smiled slightly. Interested? Sarah's heart leaped. Where would this position be? New settlement they're planning, right where that pass cuts through, place where all kinds of folks will need to learn to live together. Morrison's eyes twinkled. Might even need a guide who knows the territory, someone who could help keep peace between settlers and natives. When Sarah shared this news with Dakota, she saw hope kindle in his eyes for the first time since the attack. New place, he said thoughtfully. No old hates, maybe? Maybe, Sarah agreed. A place where we could build something different, together. Your people will still talk. Then we'll teach them a new language, Sarah said firmly. One where Apache and white aren't enemies but neighbors. Where children can grow up belonging to both worlds instead of neither. Dakota studied her face, then slowly smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually stoic features. Grandmother was right. You are changing wind. 6 weeks later, Sarah stood beside a newly built schoolhouse in the settlement of Dos Mundos, 2 worlds, watching children of various backgrounds play together in the dusty yard. Dakota worked with the railroad surveyors, his knowledge of the land invaluable, and his presence a bridge between the company and local Apache bands who might otherwise have resisted the intrusion. They'd married quietly, in a ceremony that blended traditions, the local padre officiating while Dakota's grandmother, summoned from the north, gave her blessing in Apache fashion. Not everyone approved, but enough did to give them hope. As the sun set over the desert, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah felt Dakota's arms wrap around her from behind. Regrets? He asked. Never, she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. We're building something new here, something that honors all who were lost while making space for those who survive. My sister would have liked you, Dakota said softly. Would have called you sister, too. Sarah turned in his arms. seeing the mixture of sadness and joy that would always mark both their faces. Survivors who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances and chosen to create something beautiful from the ashes. "Then I am honored to carry that name," she said, and kissed him as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. In the distance, a coyote called, no longer a sound of loneliness, but of wilderness enduring. The desert had tested them with loss and violence, but also taught them that love, like water, would always find its way. And in this new settlement where two worlds met, they would spend their days proving that bridges, once built with courage and compassion, could stand against any storm. The Apache warrior who'd found a dying woman in a cave and the frontier woman who'd learned to see beyond fear had written their own ending, not the one either had expected, but perhaps the one they'd both been moving toward all along, under the vast western sky. Anything was possible for those brave enough to reach past boundaries and grasp the hand waiting on the other side. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West, where love conquered the deepest divides. We'd love to hear where you're enjoying this story from. Share your location in the comments so we can connect with listeners around the world. Please subscribe to From Wild West channel and let us know your thoughts about Sarah and Dakota's journey. What touched your heart in their story?